Manager of Sannam S4 based in our Mumbai office. And welcome to today's presentation on TradeWinds 2019, find out what opportunities are awaiting in India and beyond. Today's webinar is presented by Sannam S4 and the U.S. Commercial Service, and I am pleased to have Eileen Nandi, the highest ranking U.S. Department of Commerce official in India. She's joining us from Delhi, as well as Leslie Drake, who is leading the TradeWinds efforts back in the U.S. out of Charleston, West Virginia. A few kind of rules of the road before we get started. Today's webinar will be recorded. So for those of you who know others who would be interested, we will be following up with both the presentation and the recording if you would like to pass it along. Two, in terms of Q&A, there is a chat box. My colleague Mohit, who's based in Delhi, is looking after the activity there, and we'll be taking questions at the end of the presentation. Any questions that we don't get to, we will be sure to follow up on email. Right now we have 114 people who have dialed in, which is fantastic, a really great showing. In total, there were 415 registrants to today's webinar, which I think is a testament to the interest in the region, in the Indo-Pacific region, and in India as well. So if we don't get to all of your questions, we will follow up. In terms of the flow, I will pass it off to Eileen here shortly, who will lead us through today's presentation. She will hand it over to Leslie, who will talk more specifically about TradeWinds, what you need to know, and how you can sign up for this major mission that the U.S. Department of Commerce is bringing in the beginning of May. So I think just to give everyone some context as well in terms of who is on the line, I had a chance to kind of review. And you know, we have large businesses, we have small businesses, we have lots of higher education institutions. And what I thought was very encouraging, we have economic development organizations from across the United States that have also dialed in. And these economic development organizations, as well as the U.S. Export Assistance Centers, are local to you and ready, willing, and able to kind of help answer any questions post this webinar as a follow-up. So welcome everybody, and we will be with you for the next hour. And with that, maybe Eileen, I'll pass it over to you to kick us off.
Great. Thank you, Michael. And I really appreciate your help and that of your Sannam S4 colleagues to help put on this webinar. So good evening, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for joining us. As you see on the front slide, every day in India, we are simultaneously in the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries. This is a country that is in the midst of rapid change with a lot going on. So it's a fascinating place to work. Any given day, I'm in an office park that is more high-tech than many places in the U.S. Then I go to a government ministry where they have files of papers with rubber bands, and they need signatures that they shuffle around from office to office. So you see a wide discrepancy while you're working in India, and that makes it a fascinating place. It's also a complex place. So for everything we're going to be telling you, you might talk to somebody else who tells you something that is different but equally true. So it just takes a while to sift through the information, and we're here to help you with that. So moving on to the next slide, most people know that India is, of course, a large market. So it's, the population is over 1 billion people, and it's growing. It's also the fastest growing economy in the world, as it was last year. And we expect that trend to continue with a growth rate of in the high 7%. So that means that there's tremendous potential for U.S. companies wanting to sell their goods and services. What Michael is going to jump in, I think, for most slides. So Michael, I'll let you jump in here before I move to the next slide.
Sure. I think something just to highlight, a few other stats to take away. I moved to India a couple of years ago and was pretty excited about it, and but my dad was excited to tell everybody, at church and everything, and Michael's moving to India, and I say, why India? So I'm constantly kind of pumping stats back to my family to explain to them why India, but a few other ones. I mean, by 2030, India is going to be the second largest consumer economy in the world. That'll be second ahead of the U.S., which will be number 3, and China number 1. It'll also be the largest population by 2024, and half of the population is currently under the age of 25. So it's by far the largest young population in the world, which has a big appetite for consumer goods. And Eileen, maybe I'll pass it over to you in terms of the next slide on Indian consumerism.
Okay. So Michael just said it's a young population, and one thing to keep in mind is that the young people in India tend to live at home with their parents until they get married. So in many cases, they have more disposable income than their counterparts in the United States. And India has a very high savings rate. I'm not going to go through each slide and read it, and we will make this presentation available for anybody who wants it afterwards. But the consumer trends are really, really booming. So this just speaks to the large market here and the number of consumers wanting high-quality goods.
And I think across the Indian market, there's been a lot written about India leapfrogging a number of different technologies. So from land telephone lines, directly into mobile phones, and the 1.6 billion wireless subscribers, I think, is a testament to kind of that number. But you'll see, people across the country having access to kind of cell phones, and therefore all of the information, all of the entertainment. Netflix is in India, so people are excited to access content, new products, and particularly Western content as well. So with that, back over to you, Eileen.
Great. Okay, so the next slide shows a map of India, and it's important to show the real diversity that we have across the country. India is, of course, a subcontinent, so the land mass is huge. But here you see the different states. India has 29 different states and union territories. And states in India are much more powerful than the states we have in the United States. So the chief minister is bigger than a governor. And in terms of population size, many states are bigger than many countries. So for U.S. companies looking to come to India, and it does depend on the nature of your product and company, but in many cases we recommend having regional strategies, because doing business in the north is very different from the south and east and west. In terms of consumer preferences, in terms of style, culture. There's many different languages, of course, religions. It's an incredibly diverse place. So a one-size-fits-all approach will not work unless your product is extremely niche. And we're here to help you through that. So the cities where you see stars is where we have offices. We have 7 offices across the country to help U.S. companies penetrate those markets. And the states, as I mentioned, they're very powerful here. They also compete with each other. So much like states in the United States compete to get foreign direct investment or even investment from large U.S. companies, the states here are keenly aware of what other states are doing and are working to improve the ease of doing business. So some of the top states are in the south of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, but they're really spread widely throughout the country. We have an office, of course, in Washington, D.C. That helps us with a lot of the policy work. And then we also work with our State Department colleagues in Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Nepal. So if you're looking to look at India to use it as a springboard or a platform to look at opportunities throughout South Asia, we'd be happy to help you with that.
Thank you, Eileen. Yeah, I think the only thing to add on to that and to reiterate is Eileen's point about competitive federalism and how that has really picked up over the years. And if you look at the state, the top two states listed there, Andhra and Telangana, they were actually one state, just as recently as kind of 5 years back. So since they split, those two state governments have been really competitive, kind of against each other to make their state particularly attractive for foreign investment and for foreign organizations that are looking to expand into the country. But the other states listed there as well are kind of great opportunities and all very different, from each other. So Eileen's point in terms of having a, certainly have an India-specific strategy, but from there, I think you also need to look at that regional approach. And at Sannam S4, we have 4 offices, one in Delhi, one in Mumbai, one in Bangalore, and Chennai. And through those offices, we kind of have coverage across the north, north, south, east, and west. Back over to you, Eileen.
Great. So if you look at the trade numbers between the United States and India, it shows a very rosy picture. So since 2010, our bilateral trade has tripled, essentially tripled. We don't have the full year 2018 data out yet, but that we've seen up through November, we're also seeing very, very strong growth. So that's all very positive. However, I think this is just we're not meeting our potential with where we could be with India, given the size of our economies and the really strong people-to-people ties that we have. A lot of our partners are talking about having $500 billion worth of bilateral trade in a few years. So we're at $126 billion as of last year, which is definitely better than $46 billion in 2010. But we're looking to work with all of you to help boost those numbers and get closer to $500 billion.
Yes, and I think that's a really good point, and something to, in terms of this $126 billion, it's important to know that all of the very large companies in the U.S. that we're familiar with are, for the most part, here in India, and in some cases have been in India for decades, if not centuries. I think Abbott and Citibank and a few others have celebrated, their 100-year anniversary in India. So these companies continue to invest in the market and are bullish on the market. But even with their very large investments, I think to hit that $500 billion mark, it's going to really take a concerted effort on everyone's part to really support the SME sector back in the U.S. and the SME sector here in India to really boost those numbers. And I think one of the really encouraging things that we're seeing is a lot more support being provided for those that are looking to do international investment, international exporting internationally. There's many, there's Indian professional services firms that are expanding into the U.S. there, and kind of vice versa. So the number of resources that are available are only increasing, year on year, given the importance and given the opportunity that I think so many different companies see in the Indian market. Eileen, back to you.
Great. So our ties with India are very, very strong, very, very deep. I mentioned the people-to-people ties. every day I run into people who have family members in the U.S. Their children have studied in the U.S. So there's Indians have generally a very positive view of the United States and see it as an aspiration of a place to live for a while and to study. Last week we had a great week with the CEO Forum and the Commercial Dialogue. The U.S. and Indian CEOs have some wonderful ways that they're working together in some of their key working groups. And then in the Commercial Dialogue, we work with the government of India on standards, on business climate and investment issues, and travel and tourism. So we had a very positive week last week, and building on that momentum. The United States Trade Representative holds the Trade Policy Forum with the government of India, and that's where different policy issues are worked out. And then this year, last year in 2018, we had some strong momentum under what we call the 2+2 dialogue, where the Department of State and Department of Defense work with their counterparts on security and defense issues. So overall, our engagement is very, very strong. I mentioned before the Indo-Pacific strategy, and this is a strategy from the Trump administration looking at India and other parts of South Asia to try to build regional connectivity and enhance trade ties. So that's something we're looking to do throughout the region and working with our partnership hosts in the neighboring countries to help U.S. companies explore those opportunities as well.
And I think to add to this, in terms of U.S.-India trade relations, just the amount of activity within this space across a number of different organizations. So whether you're looking at the U.S.-India Business Council or U.S.-India Strategic Partnership Forum, AmCham has offices across India and is made up of U.S. companies that are advocating for different policies that will make India a more attractive market for U.S. businesses. So I think there continues to be more and more engagement and activity from these organizations who can also be really good resources for companies and organizations that are looking for information or looking for access to the Indian government to carry their message forward. I think the other thing to note in terms of the trade relations is just the investment promotion bodies. I'm a big believer that kind of all boats, rise when economic activity is occurring. And in India, there's now, I believe, over a dozen U.S. jurisdictions that have full-time offices in the market, and they're resources not only for exporters and those organizations, universities, companies that are coming into the market, but they're also working hard for their states to attract FDI and attract Indian investment back home in the U.S. So the amount of activity, the amount of support is really at a I guess at a kind of all-time high, and shows no signs of slowing down. Eileen, over to you on the sectors.
Great. So we see tremendous potential in a number of sectors. I'm going to touch upon these briefly. Aerospace and defense. I was reading today that the Minister of Civil Aviation, who is also the Minister of Commerce and Industry, he's dual-hatted right now, but he predicts that India will need to buy 2,300 jets by the year 2030. So essentially in the next 11 years, India is going to be buying a lot of airplanes, which means a lot of the ancillary products and services will go with that. India's defense needs are also very, very big. We have very close cooperation on the defense side. This week we have the Aero India show in Bangalore, where we had a lot of fancy defense and civil aviation aircraft. And space is another area that is strong and growing, and we're seeing some interest from U.S. Space companies here. Healthcare is also a booming sector. traditionally, India has had more government-run hospitals, but in the past 15, 20 years, the number of private sector hospitals and specialty clinics has really boomed. And this growth we've seen outside the major cities. So in the second and third tier cities, they're also demanding to have world-class facilities so they don't have to travel to the large cities for their medical procedures.
Yeah, I think only a couple of things to add here in terms of the aerospace and defense sector. I think all of the suppliers to these companies, to Boeing, Lockheed, and others that are back in the U.S. that aren't already in the Indian market should be considering, following their customers here because the need from a strategic perspective, where India is located, I think will continue to rise. And then just commercially, I am on planes very regularly traveling between our offices, and the amount of traffic and the amount of travel that happens through India's airports is absolutely kind of astonishing, and they can't build these runways and airports fast enough. In Mumbai, I think it's if not the busiest, the second busiest runway in the world after Heathrow. And what they're doing here is building an entirely new, airport in Navi Mumbai. Navi means new, in New Mumbai, to be able to support the amount of traffic and the amount of demand that the travelers are that's out there for commercial travelers. In the healthcare side, one of the things to note is that the health insurance industry is still it's growing, but it's not necessarily as mature as it is in the U.S. market. So still, lots of Indian patients pay for health care out of pocket, which means there are pressures on pricing, but a lot of American companies have looked at flip that into an opportunity, especially in the med tech and medical device space, in terms of frugal innovation and developing products that are fit for purpose for the India market, and then can also potentially be exported to markets in Africa and other parts of the world that have populations that can only afford so much in terms of healthcare. So I think there's it's a growing need, and I should also say that in India, I've been to some of the hospitals here, and they have people traveling from across Africa and Central Asia to utilize those private hospitals that Eileen was mentioning. Those private hospitals are really kind of state of the art in terms of the technology that they're bringing in. So something to consider for the healthcare companies out there. Eileen, over to you.
So yes, so now turning to energy. So India has 5 different ministries that pertain to energy. So they're doing a lot. It's traditionally been a coal-based energy economy. They've really worked to diversify, and you see projects going on in energy storage, solar, any type of energy. And so we're working with a number of U.S. companies on all sorts of these fronts, and there's a lot of opportunities in energy, including smart cities. They had a very dynamic smart cities program trying to build out opportunities in cities large and small across the country. Environmental technologies, we're also seeing strong demand in this sector. You're probably aware that some of the world's most polluted cities are in India, and they are trying to make strides to improve the situation. Many of the public sector projects face a question of financing. but we do see a lot of demand helping companies and industries that do have access to funds clean up. So we're working with a lot of environmental companies as well.
Yeah, we've seen interest in waste management companies to water technology companies. I think one of the big challenges as these cities continue to grow is water and access to clean water. I know in Bangalore they just continue to kind of dig deeper in terms of wells, and they're getting to a point where they really need to come up with tech-driven solutions to some of these challenges that they face. Also, from the pollution perspective, there's a lot of efforts underway to address clean air issues in many of India's cities.
So jumping ahead to thank you. Jumping ahead to some of the service sectors where we see a lot of promise, outbound tourism. So Indians traveling to the United States is also another great success story. They are now the 6th largest travel and tourism market, meaning their spending levels are quite high. They come do a lot of shopping. And so we work with a number of travel and tourism destinations and service providers trying to get more Indians to travel to those places. Also, I know we have a number of higher education institutions on the line. And of course, India is the 2nd largest foreign supply of students in the United States. Close to 200,000 Indian students study in the U.S. Most of those are graduate students, but there is tremendous demand for students across all levels.
Yes, and I think just to add to that, I mean, I can tell you from traveling around, India over the last, few years, it's outbound tourism, but again, it kind of gets back to this younger generation, both when you're looking at tourism and education. I mean, they're really interested to go out and explore the world and explore opportunities. I was just looking through the news today, and there was an article about Maya Bay in Thailand and how they've had to shut that down because of so many visitors that are kind of pouring in from China, India, and elsewhere. So India is very much kind of on the move, and the U.S., even though it's a far destination, it's definitely an attractive destination, whether you're looking at it from a tourism perspective or from an education perspective. So moving to the next slide, and given the fact that we have a number of U.S. universities on the line, I thought it'd be worthwhile to have a bit of a spotlight on higher education specifically. So as you can see, I guess a few things. One, the U.S. is still the preferred destination for India students. We are seeing Canada and Australia rise in terms of the level of interest, and a lot of this is driven by immigration policies. Indian students are typically looking not only to kind of study, but also what opportunities post their studies are available in terms of finding opportunities in the job market there as well. Another kind of trend to point out is the rising number of private universities in India. I think there's no it's no secret now that the amount of supply for quality higher education in India is very limited, and that's why you're seeing so many travel overseas to be educated. And there's more and more private institutions and universities that are coming up that are looking to deliver, quality curriculum, quality higher education offerings to India students, and that is an opportunity that we see and see a number of our clients see in terms of engaging with these universities to help them, develop curriculum, develop the institutions themselves in terms of administratively how to run universities, and some of the areas like AI, agriculture, healthcare are areas that we see Indian institutions, looking for tie-ups with U.S. universities. I think another thing we often talk about, students studying in the U.S., but more and more universities are looking at the India market in terms of joint research opportunities. So the Indian government has lots of funding for different programs, including a program that's focused on developing entrepreneurship and innovation centers within Indian state universities. So they're looking to partner with U.S. universities that are strong in these areas to develop those innovation hubs. Again, it's kind of India government looking for ways to really capture the youth and the young population here, and really build up kind of a startup ecosystem that can create jobs and also solve some of the challenges that India is facing. In terms of other funding opportunities, certainly the U.S. government, USAID, Department of Ag, these are areas, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. These are organizations that we see a number of our universities coming to us asking us, okay, how do we've received this grant, how do we go ahead and actually implement it on the ground in India? Also, U.S. corporates and Indian corporates, there was a bill passed about five years ago on CSR, essentially requiring that 2% of profits for companies over a certain threshold be invested in CSR activity. So more and more organizations like the Tata Foundation and others are looking to partner with foreign universities to put the CSR funding to work in a positive way. There is something I'd like to flag in terms of an initiative that we kicked off with an organization called the USIndia Strategic Partnership Forum. It's called the USIndia Knowledge Exchange. And again, this is a platform that's really built to bring together the leading minds in India and U.S. academia to focus on joint research that will make an impact in terms of India's development goals, and also support both governments in terms of the collaboration in higher education, and how we really leverage all of the good work that is being done to support the citizens of both countries, students in both countries, and also companies that are looking to do more and more research as well. So lots of activity in the higher education space, and we'd be happy to discuss that further in the Q&A session as well. Eileen, over to you.
Great. Yeah, so I mentioned, India is a complex market, and there are some challenges that U.S. companies typically face. I saw one of the participants asked about intellectual property protection. We have a patent and trademark office under my team, and we do work with companies helping to protect IP, and working with the government of India to help them develop a framework to protect it. As I mentioned, each Indian state will have a different regime for pretty much everything, which includes intellectual property. If you're looking to sell your product or service to India, some of these challenges won't apply to you because obviously you're looking to get a good partner, somebody to buy, and that they pay for your product or service in a timely fashion. However, we are seeing more and more local content requirements with government bids and contracts. They have a Make in India policy where they are trying to create more manufacturing opportunities in India. So for a number of government contracts, they will have, and they'll state a number, 30% of the content must come from Indian companies. So that is something to be aware of and read the tender specifications very, very closely. There also have been a number of really good reforms. The first one listed is the goods and services tax. So previously, each Indian state would have its own tax regime. So that would make it very, very hard, especially for a U.S. exporter to figure out how to price a product. And going from state to state, it makes it very difficult. So now they have one tax regime across the country, which makes it, in that sense, it makes it very easier, much easier for U.S. companies. So there are challenges, but there have been a number of reforms, and we are working closely with the government of India on pretty much everything on this slide.
Yeah, and I think a couple of things to add to that. One is that about 4 years ago, India's ranking in the Ease of Doing Business Index that the World Bank puts out was, I think, 142. And now they are at number 77. So they're moving in the right direction, and the government is really focused on moving that rating further and further up, or further and further down. So I think and from our perspective, because what we're working on a day-to-day basis is the compliance, is running the local offices of foreign organizations. And what's been really encouraging is with the focus of the government on digitizing the country, a lot of the registrations, a lot of the tax filings are moving to online portals, which makes it much more kind of transparent and easier to do business, and also kind of avoids some of the kind of challenges in terms of anti-bribery, anti-corruption. The more you can avoid the interactions, direct interactions with kind of the government from that perspective, the better, and that is exactly what is happening. I think another thing in terms of the challenges that we see our clients face, it's really a matter of kind of setting expectations and ensuring that the right type of support is provided to foreign clients, depending on which point they are in their journey with the market. So the U.S. Department of Commerce and supporting in terms of U.S. exporters, finding those right partners on the ground to develop distribution, to increase sales within the market. And then once companies get to a point, or organizations get to a point where they need boots on the ground, that's where things get a little bit more complex. But there's lots of support out there to be able to kind of lead companies through that entire process, which is straightforward for people who have been doing it, but when you're on the other side of the world, it does have its kind of challenges. So with that, Eileen, maybe over to you for the next slide.
Great. So for me, this is one of the most important slides with the information that I want to impress upon companies looking to export to India for the first time. So India is a very, very price-sensitive market. So that's something you have to take into account. And working with your partner, they're highly skilled at negotiating and getting the price down. I mentioned before there are some challenges, so you really need some patience and persistence to succeed. The market opportunities are enormous, but it just takes time to develop the market. This is also very much a face-to-face culture, so people will want to meet you in person. It behooves you to come make a visit here, meet with potential partners, and this is, except perhaps in the IT sector or some of the high-tech sectors, companies often are not accustomed to doing business with somebody they've just communicated with online. So people will want to meet with you. We talked before about the states and how much power the states have. Working through a regional strategy and keeping the second and third tier cities in mind. I saw that there was another question about how to develop opportunities in the second and third tier cities. That answer will depend on the nature of the company and the product, but we can definitely work with you to help you craft your strategy to enter the Indian market. And then I also wanted to share the number one complaint that I hear from Indian companies. Indian companies, most of them, as I mentioned, are very price conscious, but they are aware that U.S. companies offer quality and highly innovative products. So they want to do business with U.S. companies. But the big complaint that I get is that they say U.S. companies want to make the sale, they sell, and then they don't hear from you again. And so I think a really good selling point would be, as you meet with potential partners or with potential buyers, let them know what your after-sale strategy is. Indian companies are well aware that they're, your Asian competitors and your European competitors can get here much more easily. So if there's a emergency situation, or if you have to do some last-minute training, they can hop on a plane and be here within a few hours. Whereas for most U.S. companies, it would take at least a full day, if not a few days, to get that here. So that's just a bit of advice as you're meeting with partners. Let them know that you're in it for the long haul. Let them know what your, even after the sale is made, what your plan is to help keep in touch in the after-sales service. And feel free to be, I've got my email on the very last slide. Would love to work with you and put you in touch with my team and help you penetrate the second and third tier cities, which, again, some of these second and third tier cities alone are bigger than some countries. So there's tremendous opportunity across India.
Yeah, I think to add to that, and looking at the kind of 4 Ps, I think the fourth one in terms of presence is really important, and I think it gets to your point in terms of demonstrating the commitment to be in India for the long haul. That is really important to anybody that you're engaging with in India, and also important to your kind of sanity and success within the market is to know that India is a long-term market and a long-term play, and keeping some of that macro picture in mind in terms of it being the second largest consumer economy by 2030. One of the things in terms of what we do to support U.S. companies and other foreign organizations is helping them establish that presence. So there's a number of different ways which you can do it, including local representation services that allow foreign organizations to kind of put boots on the ground, short of establishing a legal entity. There's a number of different constraints on that, namely not being able to transact within the market itself. But it still allows you to have somebody on the ground representing your organization and being the face of the organization within the market. Somebody that you can call on a regular basis, but I think also just as importantly, someone that the India market can respond to in local IST time. And I think that's when we've seen with our clients really the amount of activity and the amount of opportunity in India really kind of come to fruition, because there is somebody that is owning that and taking that opportunity. So we do work with a lot of clients that are at the stage of needing to set up their local presence from an entity perspective. But even short of that, it is possible to have, kind of boots on the ground and, consultants on the ground to, represent your organization and provide that ongoing presence that's needed to demonstrate that commitment. So with that, I think back to you, Eileen, to hand it over to Leslie.
Great. So as we mentioned at the outset, the U.S. Department of Commerce has 7 offices throughout India. We also have over 100 offices across the United States, and our export assistance centers are ready to help you look at India and other markets around the world. So we're fortunate to have my colleague Leslie Drake on the line. She's from our Charleston, West Virginia office. And so I'm going to turn it over to her to talk a bit about our Trade Winds program that's coming up.
Thank you, Eileen. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great. And thank you, Michael, and the whole Sannam S4 team for supporting Trade Winds and offering this webinar on all these prospects in India. Some of you on the line may already be registered for this year's program, and others of you might be hearing about Trade Winds for the first time today. So after this presentation, we do invite you all to visit our website and resources, and please feel free to contact us with any questions. So my little piece here will only take about 5 minutes. I want to be sure to allow plenty of time for questions. I want to give you a little bit of background on what Trade Winds is and where we have traveled previously and what to expect and who will be there. Also a breakdown of the schedule. We do manage to fit a lot of activities into 1 week. And we'll also give you an overview of the fees and opportunities to sponsor. Publicity opportunities also abound for your company when you participate in Trade Winds. This is our 11th program. Let me flip to the next slide. You can see on this map that we have traveled with U.S. companies to, I think it's more than 36 countries by now, and we've spanned the globe from Europe to Latin America and Asia. We took our Trade Winds to Africa, and this is our first program in India. We're very excited about it to kick off here in just a few months, as Michael mentioned, in early May. Trade Winds is a 4-pronged program, and I'm going to leave this slide up here for you to digest while I talk about the 4 prongs of Trade Winds. We do manage to cram a lot into 1 week, so these many activities occur concurrently, and they're all in a central venue in New Delhi and additional cities across India and the region, which we'll talk about in a moment. But the main event includes the Trade Winds Forum, which consists of a 2-day business development conference with experts from throughout the entire region. Included in the forum is the 2nd prong. And the 2nd prong are meetings with our U.S. senior commercial officers and our diplomats from nearly 20 Asian countries. So the Eileen Nandis of the region will all be at the event, and they'll all be ready to meet with U.S. companies one-on-one through our pre-scheduled meetings during that time on May 6th through 8th in New Delhi. The 3rd prong includes self-scheduled meetings through our digital registration platform. So this is between all of the attendees and our sponsoring companies and local attendees that will come in from the market in India and New Delhi in particular. Our sponsors, such as Sannam and others, are incredible resources for consulting and services to help you with your whole Indo-Pacific strategy. And by being with them on site, you will really gain some significant knowledge and great contacts through these networking sessions. And I want to finally mention the 4th prong. This is the business matchmaking option. And these meetings will take place across India or in Bangladesh or Sri Lanka, depending upon your interest and feedback from our commercial specialists. So the feedback we provide after you register. We receive your registration form through the portal, and once we review it, we will work with you to choose an itinerary that works best for your needs, your time, your budget, and your market expectations and potential. So you can see on the screen all of the different activities that are scheduled each day from May 6th through 13th, and we're happy to walk you through this one-on-one for more clarity. Pricing does depend upon your choices. So if you elect to participate in the Trade Winds Forum only without business matchmaking, and you take part in the first 3 prongs that I mentioned, you will pay $650 per attendee. If you wish to take part in the business matchmaking, the base fee is $2,200 and includes the activities of the TradeWinds Forum in New Delhi, plus a day of business matchmaking in any of the 9 optional markets. Each additional mission stop with added-on business matchmaking is $1,000. So this pricing example is for a company with under 500 employees. You'll see the large company pricing also on the screen. The payment is only made online after your feedback has been received by you and an itinerary has been set. So as you can see by the efforts in the webinar today, TradeWinds sponsors are a very important part of the program, and we thank them all for their support during all the phases of this event. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor, we offer packages starting at around $2,500, and they all have different benefits that will meet your needs and your what you might need for exposure in certain markets along the way, whether you are going to be only in New Delhi or if you're also interested in attending some of the other mission stops. So given that TradeWinds is the U.S. government's largest trade mission to a market each year, participants are able to take advantage of the publicity prior to and on site, and we have dedicated communication specialists that will be traveling and also through our embassy contacts to help you along the way. All of the TradeWinds details can be found at our event webpage, which is posted here at export.gov/TradeWinds. And also feel free to email any of us today or through the event email account at tradewinds@trade.gov. This website has links to the complete sponsorship package. Here is a snapshot of that page. It also has links to all of our sponsors and a little profile on what they do and who you can expect to meet on site. Registration is open until March 1st for those companies seeking business matchmaking opportunities, and a little bit longer for those who would like to attend the forum only. So please register as soon as possible, as each mission stop is limited to the number of companies we can serve. And for the earliest selection for one-to-one meetings with our U.S. diplomats, we would ask you to register as soon as possible. I want to thank you all very much for your time, and Michael, I'll turn it back over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Leslie, for that overview. And I guess I would just add that the nature of TradeWinds is they choose a different market every year. This year they've chosen South Asia and India specifically. So it really will be an all hands on deck experience in terms of the Department of Commerce flying people in from the U.S., resources all across Asia, and then, as Leslie pointed out, sponsors and other partners of theirs that are in the market, very much have these dates on, and want to do our best to make it a fruitful visit for your organization. So definitely something to consider as you're looking to potentially plan your next trip to Asia and to India. I realize we only have 7 minutes, and I do want to wrap up on time, and we have about at least over 30 questions. So I'll just pose a few of them to the group and to Eileen, and then we can follow up offline with some of the specific questions that we've gotten. But one that I thought might be useful to get Eileen's inputs on is about is it possible for a U.S. exporter to identify a single Indian importer who would then link to a nationwide network of distributors? So Eileen, maybe for you to take that question, and I think I guess to kick it off, it's probably a sector by sector and product by product situation, but over to you.
Thank you. Yes, so the answer really depends on the nature of the product. As I mentioned, the more niche the product is, you could more easily go with one distributor or one partner to service you throughout the country. But if you've got a product that has multiple applications, we may recommend that you have regional representatives that will be stronger in the respective regions. My email is on this slide, so I encourage you to email me with specific questions you have, and my team and I will get back to you.
Yes, and I think the follow-up question from that was whether or not there are specific trade shows, or does India itself have significant industry shows for its market? So I can take that one, and then Eileen, maybe you can jump in. But there are a number of investor meets happening now because of the competitive federalism. So Vibrant Gujarat recently happened in January, and a number of the states have shows where they roll out the red carpet for foreign organizations that are looking to potentially do business in their state. And then each of the sectors do have trade shows that happen across the country. Some are bigger and more regular than kind of others, and then I think you'll find lots of Indian companies also participating in shows in the Indo-Pacific region as well. So, in India or in Mumbai, for example, it's only a 2-hour flight to Dubai, where there's often lots of major trade shows happening, and I think about 6 hours from Singapore. So there is lots of opportunity to kind of meet partners at these various different shows. I think it's important to ask more questions based on your product in terms of whether these shows are worth your time, and get that on ground, experience that you can get from organizations like Sannam S4, but also the U.S. Commercial Service and others as well. So we have 4 minutes left. I'll choose another question, or Eileen, I'm not sure if there's any that jumped out to you that you'd like to take before we wrap up the call.
I can't see the questions, so why don't you go with the next one? Yes.
Okay. Should a product-based company directly work with distributors in India, or have a local rep to work with distributors? Eileen, I'm happy to go with that one, or if you want to kick us off.
I would say you, unless you have an operation in India, you almost always need a local partner. They will have the sales channels that they'll know how to sell, how to find out about opportunities. So I would say almost, unless your product is very, very niche and sells on its own, and there are companies and products like that, but the vast majority, finding a local partner will make your life so much easier. Finding the right local partner will make your life much easier, and you'll be able to uncover a lot more opportunities with their on-the-ground expertise.
Yeah, I think that's important. Something I'd add to it, and we've seen clients kind of take both approaches. We have seen clients come in and find those local distributors, see success within the market. I think it's important to see success within the market before, and making sure that you have your product right, that you have your value proposition right in the market before you kind of invest further. But we do have clients that have invested in a consultant locally on the ground that can not only be kind of a local rep, but also be that point of contact for the distributors and help drive those local distributors to help increase sales. So I think it really depends on where you're at within your journey in the market. And as your revenues increase, I think considering having a dedicated local representative, because the distributors will likely have other products that they're selling within the market as well. So to ensure that your product is getting the attention that it needs, it is something worth considering. Next question I have is, and then we'll wrap it up, what kind of opportunities exist in the small and mid-sized segment? Eileen, over to you, but expound upon this one.
Sure. So I guess that's also very sector specific, but small and medium companies really drive the Indian economy as they drive our own economy. U.S. companies, obviously, the small and medium companies are often the ones with the most innovative technologies and products. Most of the companies we work with are, in fact, the SMEs, and helping the companies that don't have the bandwidth to set up operations necessarily or are not at that stage yet. So there's tremendous potential.
Yeah, I think I'd add in the tech space. I mean, lots of fintech, lots of med tech companies, but we've also worked with, mining equipment remanufacturers that were looking to kind of access the market that, aren't enormous companies, but are globalizing and competing around the world, and wanted to have some activity and opportunity within the Indian market. I do want to be mindful of time, so again, thank you everybody for your questions. If you do have any questions, like Eileen said, her email is listed on the last slide. My email is there as well. We will follow up on each of the questions that you have left for us in the chat box. And we'll also be following up with this presentation and the recording should you want to kind of forward it along to anyone else. So thank you everybody for joining. I think I saw at the max we were at around 175 participants. So really appreciate everybody joining. Have a great day ahead, and hopefully we'll see you in May.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Michael.
Yep. Thanks, Eileen.